In this video, I'm going to show you a new capability for Humbug. We just added this in the 0.6 release that went out earlier today. The thing that we're adding is the ability to look at thinking and reasoning from some of the newer AI models. So we finally got access to DeepSeek's API model earlier this week, and this week we also had Claude Sonnet 3.7 thinking model get released. So that gave us two that we could actually work with. Previously we'd had ChatGPT 01. Unfortunately 01 doesn't expose its thinking, so you can't really see anything very interesting, but for the purposes of this video I'm going to show you some output from that as well. So what you can see on screen is you can see a conversation I had with DeepSeek slightly earlier today, and I'm asking it a problem which is to design a PacMan maze. And this might sound a slightly strange thing to do, but I was reading a LinkedIn post a couple of days ago, and somebody was trying to get an AI large language model to build them a PacMan game. So I thought, well, I wonder how interesting and how difficult it is to get a PacMan maze, and it turns out it's quite tricky. So if you use some of the more conventional models, they struggle quite a lot to actually build a PacMan maze. So I wondered if the reasoning models could do better. So we'll start with DeepSeek. So what you can see here is me asking a question: can you help me design a PacMan maze? And you can see the response, which is the reasoning response in pink, where it's sort of explaining how it was. It's reasoning to itself how it should come back and help me with this problem. So I'm not going to spend too much time actually going through this, but it's interesting to see the way it's sort of trying to work out how to solve the request I give it. So you can see it comes back with a design. Unfortunately, if you look at the bottom right hand corner there, there's a problem, and this is something I saw with some of the other AI models when they're trying to draw mazes. They don't tend to do them too well. They seem to get confused by the number of symbols that they've got on the screen and get the rows in an inconsistent way. So it was close, but not quite there. It tells me it's got something, it thinks it's got it right. But I then challenge it and say I'm not sure it's a valid PacMan maze. Some of the rows seem to be slightly off. What's interesting is to watch it then try and work out for itself whether that's correct or not. So you can see it does a series of reasoning steps where it sort of tries to work out what's going on. I also ask it to potentially consider doing this as a Python program. The idea being that maybe a Python program, if it puts it in the form of a program, would actually give you a sort of better answer. So it then tries to work out what this might look like and goes through quite a convoluted sort of series of reasoning steps where it tries to work out how it might solve this request and give me a maze back in a Python program. And it has a fairly good go again. It does actually give me a Python program. Unfortunately, it has the same sort of problems. The maze just isn't actually a maze. And there's a few other slightly weird things going on in there as well. So it's tried. Unfortunately, it hasn't really done the right sort of thing. And it all slightly deteriorates from there. After 10-15 minutes, I eventually stopped trying to do this because it wasn't actually making very much forward progress. But you could see progressively it was spending more and more time trying to think through how it might solve this problem and actually trying to check for itself whether or not some of these were actually correct. So interesting to watch. Didn't quite get there, got quite close. Next one was ChatGPT. This one at least got a first attempt that had the right sort of shape, but clearly this is not a PacMan maze. There's lots of slightly weird things going on in here and lots of dead ends in that maze. Unfortunately, we can't see how it was thinking about things as it went through. Suffice it to say, it had very much the same sort of problems that we saw with DeepSeek. It tries again and it tries to come up with something that's close, but again it ends up with a few characters out of place and things not really quite how they should be. The ghost house there, for example, has an empty exit at the bottom, which is a bit sort of weird. And again, very much like DeepSeek, you see it attempt to do things in the form of a Python program when I ask it to. Doesn't quite manage to get there. So the next one I did was Claude 3.7 thinking, and this was much more interesting. So in fact I actually ran this one first. I ran the others afterwards as a benchmark, but you can see with the reasoning steps it tried to work out what the PacMan maze should look like. It actually did quite a good job of trying to work out what the various aspects should be. had an attempt at drawing a PacMan maze, and clearly that's not a maze. So, as before, sort of said, it doesn't really fit the brief. It doesn't have the right number of rows. The right number of columns in the rows. So it has another go and doesn't quite get it right. So this time, rather like we tried before, I asked it to give me this in the form of a Python program. And this time it's much more successful. So you can see it goes through a series of reasoning steps where it's trying to work out what's going on. It's sort of slightly odd when you read the reasoning because it's not actually the response, but it's replying as if it is. And you watch it trying to map out how it might draw this maze using Python. And then you can see it go through a series of iterations, which is sort of really interesting and was very unexpected, but was really nice to see. So it tries to give you the full-size maze. It does it in the simpler form with just noughts and ones to start with. And then as you watch it continue to think on it, it starts to add in more elaborate elements to this. And it starts to create a more comprehensive grid with more capabilities in there. And then finally it actually says, well, let's make it something that would be easier to use in a program and easier to use in a PacMan game, and it starts to add in some additional elements in there just to make that easier to do. This is still in its thinking phase, and then eventually after a couple of minutes we end up with it producing this response, which is just the finished version of the Python program we've just seen before. In fact, it's the same thing. And so you end up with a Python program, you can see the maze, and it then elaborates how this works. And actually, just to prove that works, what we can actually do is we can look at the program, or we can run the program that it gave me. And that's the PacMan maze that it drew. If you look, it looks like a fairly classic PacMan maze. It's symmetrical, it has tunnels across the middle, it has a ghost house, it's got power pills, it's got the sort of dots that the PacMan eats. So that's pretty successful. And then finally, as a final comparison, I wanted to see what the non-thinking version of Claude Sonnet could do. So it did something very, very similar and had a very, very similar experience. Sorry, so I forget the right one. There we go. Very similar experience where it draws the ASCII art version and it doesn't really quite work properly. This time we ask it to do it as a PacMan maze, and unsurprisingly, it's still Claude 3.7 Sonnet. So it was able to follow through and do the right sorts of things. What you'll see is that this maze is not quite as sophisticated. There's not quite as much detail in there as the previous version. And obviously it's just generated a response. It hasn't gone through the reasoning steps, so you haven't had that iteration that's taken place on the other one. So it's not as good. But nonetheless, Claude 3.7 does in fact produce a program. I actually asked it to end up doing this without using Pygame because I didn't want to install another Python library. So it rewrote it for me, this time using standard library capabilities in the Python library. And so you get a program here. This one is saved as well. There we go. So that's the PacMan maze that Claude 3.7 did without going through the thinking step. It's very, very similar. It's not quite as symmetrical. And there are a few other minor details that are not quite as good, but it essentially did the task and did a reasonable approximation. So I'm pretty sure that if we'd used Claude 3.7 and just iterated on the prompt, we'd have got to the same place as the thinking model did without having to iterate on it. But clearly at this point, Claude 3.7 is winning the PacMan challenge. So anybody who wants to build PacMan game, try using Claude 3.7 Sonnet and go from there. Okay, thank you for watching. I'm going to do some more videos talking about some other capabilities that we've added over the next week or so. So please check out the YouTube channel and take a look at them then. Okay, thank you. Bye.